Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, 320 Pilot, and today we're going to look at the very exciting update to the A320 NEO in Microsoft Flight Simulator, being worked hard on by the very clever and hardworking people who are now calling the project FlyByWire A32NX project. So they've released the second stable version of this update, and I thought it's time we take a look at that and see what sort of features they've added to the default Microsoft Flight Simulator A320. As always, none of this is for any real-world use. We'll just have a look at it and compare it to some of the behaviours of the actual aircraft. But of course, it's just for our use in Flight Simulator. So here we go. We are at Madeira Airport, sitting on the ramp, and we'll start off by just having a look at the flight deck, some of the features they've added, and then we'll go and power up and see some of the in-flight features they've added, because they've been hard at work. It's amazing how much has changed. As ever, if I do say anything isn't quite right, it's not a criticism, it's just an observation, because I know they're working very hard, constantly changing features on this this mod. So let's get started. Okay, so on the flight deck now, and one of the first things we can do is bring up the checklists. So included in the mod, and it's a very easy installation. I'm not particularly skilled at installing things onto Flight Simulator. I can just drag and drop folders, but luckily that's all you have to do. And you can see here they've actually included loads and loads of things all the way through. Look at this. It's not interactive yet, but it is. I think you can tick it, so I can tick through each thing. So engine masters, check they're off, which you would do. Engine mode selected to norm, which is in the middle there, that's set to norm. Landing gear lever down, wipers off, and that is quite an important one. You have to check those are off, because if they're on and you power up the airplane, they could scratch the windscreen if there was sand or dirt. Like, you wouldn't really want to use your wipers on a dry windscreen in your car. Battery switch is on. So now they've added this, where before these battery voltages did not display, but in the actual aircraft, just like this, they are pretty much always, well, they are always on. They're liquid crystal displays, and they show you the voltage in the battery. Now, the real aircraft, you'd want them to be above 25.5 volts, but they always seem to sit slightly below that in Microsoft Flight Simulator. But all that means is you'd have to do a charge cycle. You'd have to leave them charging for a bit. But here we go. Battery switch is on. So we're going to do number 1 and then number 2. And now they're online, which is great. So we can tick that. I wonder what that oh, look at that. Wow, they've worked really hard at this. That is clever stuff. Okay, so that's definitely done. RMP3 PA in op, PA 50%. Okay, so that is so that the voice recorder records the PAs in the cabin. They're talking about this panel up here, but it's not working at the moment. APU fire tests. Have I missed? I wouldn't expect to do that. I suppose if you're not using external power, yeah, you might do the APU fire test and then turn on the APU. You can't do the fire test in Flight Simulator yet. Yeah, you can't do that test at the moment in Flight Simulator. So we'll just say we've done that. I suppose that's why this isn't interactive yet. And then you can start up the APU. Now, I'm not going to do that, because we wouldn't normally do that on the real aircraft at this point. You'd stick with the external power if available, which it is available today. So let's go. How do I get back into my normal viewpoint? Let's see. Can I just go cockpit, reset position? There we go. Right. Okay, so available. Let's get rid of that thing. We don't need that. So click that on. So there you go. So they've made this very accessible. And it's much more detailed than it was before. And now something they've changed is these screens are off by default. Now it's actually quite rare to turn the screens off in the aircraft, because if the aircraft is left powered on, you don't need to turn them off, because they'll just turn off naturally. So we tend to just dim them. But either way, you could find them like this. And now you turn it on and you get this self-test in progress, max 40 seconds. And that's something they've added, which is really great. That's definitely on the real aircraft. You see that every time you turn it on. So let's get those all turned on. And that's what you'd see. So yeah, nice load. Like, just can't believe how much work they put in so far onto this. Right, so we're not doing the APU, but we've done the external power, cockpit lights, parking brake. Check that's on. So that would be on there. And you'd also want to check your brake pressure gauge here, because it's these little numbers at the side, which I think they've modified the logic in this as well to make it work a bit more realistically. Accu brake pressure and check, which is there. Flaps are up, and you've got to check that they're up, and also that the ECAM shows them as up. If there's a discrepancy, then that requires engineering. Speed brake disarmed, retracted, that's down. And then I think they've added a flight control page. Let me see. There it is. Look at this. It's amazing. Probe window heat auto. Well, it should be an auto anyway, like it is. And here we go. Okay, so I am now going to fire up the APU because I don't want to talk too much, but just to show you the checklist it's good. You can follow that through, and the fact it even shows you where you should be looking is absolutely brilliant, because some of those features you may not be aware of, where the panel is located. Okay, so let's fire up the APU. I'm just going to minimize the checklist. So we've done the fire test, and now let's put that dome light on so we can, oh, it doesn't work up there. Let's do that. So master switch on, and then it automatically brings up the APU page, and then you wait 3 seconds, and then you can turn it on. And that works now. It didn't work before. Previously, in the last mod, I pointed out that it shouldn't stop you from starting it. You just need to wait 3 seconds, whereas it was forcing you to wait for flap open. And they've updated the logic now, which is just great. It shows how fast this thing is progressing. And now you get flap open and it starts to spool up. And I think they fiddle with some of the timings as well. So I'll be curious to see now how we end up with the bleed page. So I'll let this start up and then take a look at that. Okay, so here it comes online now. The generator's online, 115 volts, 400 hertz is what we expect. I'm assuming the load will go up once it takes over. Oh, curious. I suppose we're using ground power. And there's a bleed pressure sitting there. So now they've added some more bleed information. So these logos are still incorrect, and this should be closed. So this should be a cross line for the engines. But I think if I go up here and turn off, it now shows the cross line. Now, again, when the engines are off, these valves are actually closed anyway. But just to show you that this has been added now, so that these actually represent where the switch is, which is a nice touch. We'll put the APU bleed on, get some air, and now that goes in line. So one day, I imagine we'll have packs displaying here, which will show you temperatures, inlet and outlet, and pressures, and that sort of thing. So that would be great. So there we go. There's a few things extra. I don't think we've got any other pages, just the flight controls, the big one, which we will look at when we powered up the aircraft. Something that I was hoping they would add, and I've been told they have. There we go. We now have a ding. Fantastic. I can't hear a ding, which would be nice. You can just about hear it from the flight deck. Look at that. Excellent. So that's a really nice touch. It's always good to have the bing bong sound on any of these passenger sides. We all enjoy that. Of course, we need to align our IRS. So I think they've added this flashing. I don't think it did that before. So that's been snuck in with, like I say, so many changes. And there's lots of features I won't get around to talking about today. There's just too many, but they've been working really hard, like I say. But I think the ADIRS panel has been adjusted, so now we'll have a few more lights. So let's set that to nav, and we get a line appear there. So I think, why does it say ADIR? You've got your IRs, which would be the rotary switches, and then usually your ADR. And then we've got a line on each of these. Yeah, okay. So it'll normally have the on-bat, but I think that's still not modelled yet. I think it's all running off one sort of system. I don't think there's actually 3 systems modelled yet. But there we go. So they go into a line, and then we get our messages on here. A line in 7 minutes. So it normally says greater than 7, because it usually takes a bit more than 7 minutes. But while that's aligning, you don't want to push back or anything like that. You need to leave it to align itself. And then that should bring up the screens, which before came up quite quickly. So let's see. Yeah, we're starting to get some of the PFD. Because, of course, for the PFD attitude horizon, I think I've mentioned before, it doesn't actually need to be aligned as much. It's just a gyroscope, a bit like a normal one in a smaller aircraft. It's just attitude and heading mode. Whereas the actual ADIR system needs it to be fully aligned to work out where on the planet it is. I've just been looking through the checklist, and what I can see is there's some great features here. So ECAM, recall, jaws, and hydraulics. So you would do that. The recall button isn't modelled at the moment, so checklist is clearly ready for when the simulator is more complete. And then you're looking at door, you want to check you've got enough oxygen pressure there, and hydraulic systems aren't modelled yet, but you're looking for quantity. And it's even got rain repellent pressure, which is actually on the rear panel that's behind the captain. If we go into landing view, it's up here, but they've got the right case here, but it's not shown. A lot of airlines don't use rain repellent anymore. It's quite rare. I don't think it's particularly healthy substance. I'm not sure about that. I don't know what it's made of, but it's very rare to use it. It does work well in heavy rain though, if you ever do use it. But there you go. So before we push back, we're going to make sure the thrust levers are definitely at idle. Check all your windows and doors are closed. Let's get that beacon on, which arms the slides in this, which is great. So that's a nice detail from the mod. Something as well, I've loaded up the FMGC with some performance figures. And what you would also do is put on your flight directors. And they've changed this slightly. So now the flight directors work by actually, they do get rid of the modes so that it doesn't just show armed modes when it shouldn't. And it also, this is spaced a bit better, 1FD2 climb nav blue, which is what you'd expect these to be armed in blue. So that is all coming along nicely. So let's get ourselves pushed back to get the engine started. Okay, for some reason I'm not able to request a pushback from this stand in the air traffic menu. I've got fuel supply, power supply, catering, so I'm not sure what I'm missing here. I think it records all of these as GA stands for some reason at Madeira. I couldn't find one that was considered an actual gate for aircraft, so maybe that's why, although it does look like we have a tug down there. But anyway, that's a flight simulator issue. So we'll start our engines on stand, which is possible. So let's see if the checklist, let's see, we've done that. Engines start on non-interactive. Okay, yeah, so this does tell you how to do it. So we're going to go to ignition start, brings up the engine page, which is correct, and we'll start up engine 2. That goes on. You expect to see this valve go inline. So this has been changed, hasn't it? They've done a big change here where it's now using the EIS2 screen, because the default Airbus ECAM page here was using, for some bizarre reason, the very old EIS1 screen, which you don't tend to find on NEOs. I've never seen it. I don't know if it's even an option anymore. So this is actually much more representative of what we would see on a NEO Airbus. So this line should be vertical at the moment, like it is here, pumping air into this system. So I'm not sure if what's happened there, but that would normally be vertical, and then it's spinning it. And once you get fuel flow, you would see A or B appear in line with it to show you that that is igniting. So hopefully that'll get swapped around at some point. But there we go, engine starting up. The NEO engines do start up quite quickly. They're quite good, actually. There we go. It would eventually say avail in the actual aircraft, but I don't think this one does. One way to check it's online and working is to check the generators online, which it is. Okay, and now we'll do engine master 1 to on. And I see, yeah, I think these are slightly confused. These are the wrong way around. That should be vertical to show you that it's starting and pumping air through the engine. But there we go. So now that's turning N2. It will spin N2 to increase N1 slightly, and then eventually fuel flow will go in, and the igniters will start up on this side, either A or B. Whilst that's starting, we can see another addition. Seatbelts and no smoking signs that now appear in the ECAM memo, which is great because they do in the aircraft. You can often end up seeing that seatbelts have been left on if you've forgotten them for whatever reason. It does appear down here. And that engine is starting up nicely. Okay, we've managed to push back. Don't ask me how we managed that. And here we go. Let's put that to arc, have constraints on, and we are pretty much ready to taxi out. We're going to take off from runway 05. So something we might do on a short taxi like this is check the flight controls before we taxi. You can do it while taxiing in the Airbus, but on a short taxi it might be more distracting. So let's move the controls and see if this page works. So there we go, full left, full right, neutral, full down, full up. Oh, almost. Is that going to work? Not quite. And neutral and rudder. I don't think the rudder's simulated yet. So they've started to add features to this page, which is great. I would expect when you roll, the spoilers would appear, but I know that that's not modeled yet. And you're looking for these green arrows to actually reach these boxes. So the elevator should reach into this little box at the top there. It does when you go nose down, but it should also do it nose up. So that's just something that hopefully will be added as well. Let's have a look at the... I think ELACs and SECs have been modeled now as well. So let's turn off a couple of those. And there we go. It shows you when they're not on. I think they're normally amber. I'm not sure they're red, but I'm not entirely sure about that. We don't often see the flight control computers turned off on the Airbus intentionally. It could be that they fail, but there we go. They're they're very reliable. So that's great though. So we can start to see some deeper stuff getting added in here. Let's have max auto brake on, and I don't think takeoff config works yet, no. But again, so many things are now appearing. So let's go and take off. Whilst we're backtracking on the runway here, just something to point out is that I have done a video on the previous version of this, so there are some features that I'm skipping over slightly that we've already talked about. So do please feel free to go and watch that video if you want to see some of the initial features that were added when this mod first came out. Likewise, there's probably already new features in it that aren't being shown here because they're updating it very rapidly. So I will be following the progress of it as time goes on, because obviously we have a very keen interest in the A320 on this channel. So here we are at the runway threshold. As you can see, the threshold is actually slightly in front of us. There's 0.5, but when you have these arrows pointing in this direction, that means we're allowed to take off on this part of the runway. But if we were landing, we would have to land after this line. So that's the start of the landing runway. It's often used when there's sort of terrain restrictions, things like that. But there we go. So let's see what changes for takeoff now. So let me just set up, make sure that was on max. But there we go. We got our flight directors on. We got our speeds, our performance, our modes. We're going to go up to 5,000 feet initially. And I think we are ready to go. So let's go and see how these modes are on takeoff. So let me just make sure I've got this camera set up so I can actually move around. There we go. So we're going to release the parking brake and hold on the foot brake. And that seems to disconnect. See, that doesn't happen in the real aircraft. You can use the brakes, the foot brakes, without disarming the auto brake. So that's interesting because we need to be able to hold the airplane on the brakes while we set thrust. So there we go. That's something that will hopefully change in the future. So let's set the thrust to 50% N1. Side stick half forwards, so just push the nose down about half deflection forwards, release the brakes, and now all the way through to the flex gate, and we should see on the PFD man flex. I know it's pretty small, let me zoom in for you. 65 SRS runway, and now we have the auto thruster hummed in blue, which is great. As we reach 80 knots, we can start to release the side stick forward pressure to neutral. So now my side stick's just sat at neutral, using the rudder to keep it straight. The rudder's still overly sensitive. There's 3v1 and there's rotate, so I'm going to raise the nose 3 degrees a second. Oh, try to without pitching up too much. And then we get positive climb, gear comes up. Somewhere around 15 degrees usually, and it's gone into nav mode. That's a bit of an early right turn, but there we go. And they seem to have fixed the performance a bit. The flight director SRS mode still doesn't behave quite as I'd expect because it demands that you raise the nose, or it just sort of seems to follow whatever pitch you go to. But let's get through 1500 feet and accelerate and see how it handles there. So thrust climb. Auto thrust is now white because it's engaged, which is good. Get the nose down. Let's put in an autopilot and see how it behaves. So there's autopilot 1, and they've now changed that into white, which is correct. It shows up in white on the aircraft. It was green before, so that's a great job. Now we're above S speed. Let's retract those flaps. It doesn't actually target S speed. It should target an acceleration unless there's a speed restriction in the FMGC. But there we go. So now, because you wouldn't really retract the flaps unless it was accelerating already. But there we go. Up to 250 knots, climbing to 5,000 feet. And now we have out blue armed. So that is in climb, and that says thrust climb. So let's level off at 5,000 and then see how the autopilot behaves and what changes they've made. So a big change, and something that does, I'd go so far as to say that has been frustrating me when using the Airbus in Microsoft Flight Simulator, has been the way the altitude modes behave, because it only frustrates me because I'm used to the actual aircraft, so I'm constantly finding myself confused because it wasn't very representative, and they've made some good steps towards that now. So if I was to wind up the altitude to 6,000 feet, or 7,000 feet, it should just appear here in 7,000, which it does. And then if I pull this, it should go into thrust climb and open climb, and then I should see out blue armed at 7,000. And there it is, thrust climb, open climb, and it arms now correctly. And if I change it, 8,000, it should stay armed, whereas before it would need to be reselected. So now I can adjust that to 14,000, and it will stay in thrust climb, open climb until it reaches it and levels off at 14,000, or we can set standard now, flight level 140. So that's been modified and is a big difference to before, and it's much better. So for example, let's adjust that to, let's go up to 10,000 feet or flight level 100 now. And I'll show you some of the other things about the vertical modes that have changed. Here we are at flight level 100 in alt, so it's armed correctly and captured now. So let's reduce that down to 80 and do the same. Thrust idle now appears. I've had videos in the past where it's never said that. So now they've made sure it does appear when it should, and you get open descent, and it will do the same now. It will go down and capture flight level 80. So the open climbs and open descents, which would always involve going to thrust idle or thrust climb. So an open descent is a thrust idle descent, and then you can adjust the speed. I talk about it more in my Autopilot Basics video, but it's been much improved, which is very good. So what we can do is also see what happens now when we take off the flight directors, where it correctly goes into speed mode and removes the modes. Let's take out the Autopilot as well, and there you go. We've got speed and auto thrust still engaged. And now if I raise the nose, let's just pull up and start a shallow climb, we'll see the thrust increase to hold our speed. So before, I think it was still displaying some FMAs that weren't supposed to be there. FMAs are these flight mode enunciators. They appear at the top and they tell you what the flight guidance is trying to do. So either the flight directors or the autopilot if it's engaged. But they've done a great job adjusting that. I think as well the fuel flow's been adjusted again, so they've been fiddling with these things, working hard. Only thing I have noticed is if we set this to let's say 90, put on those flight directors. Yeah, so the autopilot should, when you bring in these flight directors, when you turn things back on or adjust it like that, you'd expect it to go into basic mode, so heading and vertical speed. So if I have flight directors off like this, it's in speed mode, and then when I turn them on, I'd expect it to, oh, there's vertical speed, that's good, and heading, it wouldn't ever go straight into nav. But there we go. Let's set that to 100 and get it to level off there. Now this is my other thing that I'd like to see eventually change, which I'm sure they're working on. It should also say alt blue 100, even though it's below a vertical speed. It doesn't seem to work so well in vertical speed at the moment. As you can see, it's gone straight through. Yeah. Whereas in the real aircraft, if you wind this above you with vertical speed mode engaged, it would still capture it. So that would be a nice change. I'm not even sure how it wants me to adjust that now. Oh, you got to select it and then pull it. Yeah, so in the real aircraft you can select it, pull it, and then it would arm. But there we go. So the vertical speed mode is still not quite right, but they've done a great job upgrading this open climbs and open descents. There we go. One last thing I'd like to show is how now it can also give you the category. So this was some bad vectoring by myself onto the ILS, so we're going to go through the localizer and back in from the other side. But what you can see is it's capture, glide, slope and lock, but also it says Cat 3 single, which is what you would expect. So we've got Cat 3 single here. In the real aircraft you can engage both autopilots as soon as you arm the approach push button here, but sadly in this one you can't, so it would just be Cat 3 single. I have a video on auto lands in this aircraft, but also another one that's either out already or coming out soon on my channel, which looks at the Toliss Airbus, which is a slightly more comprehensive simulation at the moment, and that talks about different categories and modes and so on. But yeah, that would say Cat 3 dual, but now it says Cat 3 single, which is something they've added in, which is correct. It would say Cat 3 single with one autopilot. So there we go. So one of the other improvements that they've added to this mod. That's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been interesting to you. There'll be plenty more Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane 11 videos to come, featuring the Airbus, where we'll look at some more features and some more in-depth details on the systems and how to go about using the aircraft as we would like to. As I said at the start, this mod is a work in progress. I've probably missed a few features. I know I have, in fact. So I hope that I'll get a chance to talk about those in future videos as the mod keeps updating, as well as looking at the progress of this project in general. I know they have a website now and liveries coming out for it, so I'll provide a link to the website in the description. That's all for today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again in another video soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
100. 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, retard.